Hi, how are you all? I'm David Parker. Last year, about this exact same time, I was in this room with Rick Anderson, and we did a panel on a hypothetical future state of demand-driven acquisition, where we talked about a possible multimedia DDA experience with even more robust analytics than we have today, things like mediated buying, where price setting could happen between libraries and publishers, all very hypothetical and interesting. At the end, a librarian came up to me and said, David, I think it's really great what you guys are doing, postulating about the future, developing these impact metrics and engagement metrics that you have on your platform, but cost per use is getting lost in the conversation again. Can we go back and consider revisiting cost per use data? So I said, yeah, that's an interesting idea. I reached out to a couple of librarians I know, and I said, why don't we try to put together a panel for next year where we just look at cost per use across the major different platform types: subscription, aggregation, and demand-driven access. And so that's what this is today. You will note that we had a last-minute addition to the panel. I want to thank Tom from Canopy, Tom Humphrey, for joining us. It was really last minute, and I appreciate him adapting and adjusting last minute for participation. Also, I want to thank Doug Mingle, who was not listed on, of course, the people presenting today, who provided us broad platform data for cost per use across films on demand. So that'll show up in our data as well. So again, I'm David Parker. I'm Vice President of Product Development focused on video for ProQuest. Tom Humphrey from Canopy, Corey Tucker from UNLV, Rebecca Oling from Purchase, and then again, special thanks to Doug Mingle, who couldn't be here today. So a bit about cost per use and capturing a bit about capturing video cost per use and what we want to accomplish in the study that we did together. As I said, we want to provide CPU, cost per use average, across as many university types as we could, in addition to, and then, for subscription aggregation, and then DDA across as many university types as we can. We want to promote an analysis of this cost per use data in conjunction with engagement and impact measures. Again, referring back to how I started the presentation and that librarian who met with me last year saying, let's revisit cost per use, so that you're able to think about the two in conjunction. Methodology: accumulate as many as we could, 12-month samples, anonymous. So this really came down to Corey and myself collecting the data. We solicited librarians we know, asked them to give us 12-month snapshots of cost per use for both subscription aggregation and demand-driven. We promised them we'd keep it, that we would keep it anonymous. We wouldn't mention the providers nor their names as universities. We would just give the aggregated data, spend, and cost per use. For anyone who's interested, we have about 50 schools in the data set. We're happy to share it with you. Just email me and I'll send you that data. Do as you like with it. Last point, the disclaimer: it's not scientific. It's not statistically representative. It's interesting. It shows some things that maybe you haven't seen before, maybe you have. Something to think about in terms of looking at cost per use. So broad findings across this 12-month data set. The first number, the 24 anonymous universities, those were the ones I collected. The one below it, the 6, are the ones that Corey collected. I think you can see, without me going through each one of these data points, that there's a pretty consistent band in spend across DDA and subscription aggregation from the data we collected. There isn't a wide swing one way or the other in bottom spend, top spend, cost per use. In other words, on average, we're in a fairly tight range in cost per use between the subscription aggregation and the demand-driven access platform model. The data below the 24 and the 6 is a roll-up of platform-delivered data. So that line of 376 for cost per use on DDA represents a 12-month snapshot of our DDA, Alexander Street, and a sample set that Tom provided for Canopy. The bottom one on subscription aggregation is a snapshot 12 months from Films on Demand, that's the Films Media Group product, and Academic Video Online for an average 12-month cost per use across the entire platform. So let me say that again. Those platform numbers are platform-wide 12-month snapshots. The ones you see above it from the individual anonymous universities are individual schools reporting and then rolled up into a small data set of, in this case, 24 anonymous universities, 6 anonymous universities, 18 anonymous universities, and 5 anonymous universities. Okay, so we have to move kind of quickly because it's a 45-minute session. Again, ask any questions. If you want the data set, I'm happy to send it to you. My key observation from looking at this data over the past 9 months here, there is no such thing as average. So on average, the range looked to be pretty tight across DDA and subscription aggregation, right? But none of your schools are average. You have to think about what your expected usage profile is. Am I going to access lots and lots of titles across many disciplines and departments? Or maybe I have just one department that's going to use a lot of video. You have to think about those things and assess the data in light of that. Another key finding, when usage is low to moderate or concentrated across a more narrow band of titles, not a super wide band of titles, then DDA does produce lower cost than the subscription aggregation model. It looked like in the data about a 50-cent difference on cost per use. On the cost per use for high use accounts, that's anyone with 10,000 views or more, these appear to move in opposite directions from the samples I saw. And I give you an example here. The top one is a subscription, cost per use at 61 cents, 18,000 plus views on an $11,000 subscription, right? The bottom one is a DDA spend on 12,511 views with a cost per use of $5.10. So in that scenario, high use across a lot of titles, it appears that the data moves in opposite directions. But again, small sample. And that's it for me. I'll turn it over to Tom.
Sorry, that's working. Hello, everyone. My name's Tom. I work for Canopy. That's the last time you'll hear me say the word Canopy because I've been instructed to be very clear that this is a vendor-neutral presentation. My objective today is to not only contribute, or to try to contribute to this discussion some different insights and interesting insights which contribute to this discussion about CPU. Before I get started, I wanted to quickly outline. I'll actually go to the next slide. What is, whoop. Okay. Having a bit of trouble here, if anyone's familiar with. Yeah, could you? Don't know how to make this. You just make that the first slide and tell me how to click through. Which one is that? There we go. Technical difficulties. Okay, so before I get started, I wanted to be really transparent with you just around the who is in my data set. I'm going to be presenting to you some data insights today, and I think it's really important for you to know who exactly, which colleges are actually in this data set. And there's a couple of reasons I wanted to be really open to that, and you can see the 20 colleges which we've actually included in the data set for my insights today. And the reasons I wanted to be really open about that is really twofold. The first is that, from the presentation overview, which probably many of you read today, it said often data is presented from very limited and selected samples demonstrating the excellent cost per use of one vendor or purchase model over another vendor or purchase model. So I just wanted to be open and dispel any sentiment which might be to that effect today, because this is, as you can see, a pretty broad data set. There's no selection biases here. This is a very broad mix of colleges. We've got a couple of Ivy Leagues in there, a couple of community colleges, a couple of what I call big boys as well, like Michigan, etc. The second reason I wanted to just be really clear about this data set was I wanted to make sure that my data is really open to scrutiny. I'm going to be showing you the data here, and if any colleges which are actually involved in this data set has any questions, they can kind of sense check some of the numbers against what I'm about to present. So, This is the first finding which I have from this sample of 20 colleges. First insight is as follows. The cost per use for 2017 across all of these colleges, and obviously we're looking at a sample from January to September, when we had to stop the analysis, was $3.42 cost per use. When I say use, that is actually a play. So a play on a film is a use, so the cost per use was $3.42. One thing that was really interesting, I think, about this finding was that it was really in line with the data which David was sharing, particularly from Corey's sample. Corey went out there and sampled 11 R1 doctoral colleges, and you may have noticed from the slides before that Corey's sample found that there was a $3.41 cost per use across that sample. Now that never happens, right? I was pretty excited by that. The other thing, obviously, David's sample, David had a separate sample as well of 38 colleges where he'd gone out and asked those colleges. His sample found $3.58, so that was, obviously pretty in line with that versus a $4.10 for subscription. The second insight, I think, which is quite interesting, is putting that $3.42 in context. Okay, there was a presentation today at 2:30, and a lady from Claremont Colleges called Maria was in that presentation, and she was talking about the physical book collection. And she mentioned how in the physical book collection, 40 to 50% of books just never get circulated; they sit there on the shelf with dust. And in terms of the cost per checkout of physical books, $30 for course reserve books, and across the whole book collection, it's $80 per checkout. So it gives us a little bit of context, not only for looking at film, but actually looking across resources in the library as well to put some of that, value per dollar into perspective. It's also, I think, quite interesting to put in perspective from consumer resources. We're all familiar with transactional video online resources such as Amazon Video and iTunes, etc. We're familiar with the fact that many of those resources are about $4 a play to rent a film, and so seeing a cost per play effectively in line with that is obviously heartening, particularly in the context of education, where we're finding group uses as well as personal uses as well. Third insight, the cost per use has shifted a little bit over time. We, with the benefit of this sample, had colleges which are using PDA over multiple years. So we've got 3 years of data for that entire sample of 20 colleges. So you can see here there was a bit of a lift actually which went from 2015 to 2016, and we saw a 7% drop into 2017. Tells me two things. 7% drop to 2017, meh, but we're seeing like a pretty consistent level over time. It's not as if we're looking at a small sample from just 1 year. We've got 3 years of data, which is suggesting that we're at a pretty stable rate, somewhere around the mid-level of the $3 mark. The last insight was that there was fairly consistent data from across the sample size. You can see that some libraries nudged up to $5.50, that's for sure, and some were down at $2.50, or a little bit below that, as you can see. But there was nothing necessarily clear, like there was no, type of college which guided where it fell on that data. We had some large colleges up there, some down there. UNLV is down, right down the bottom, and Purchase up here is somewhere in the middle. And so there's no definite, reason why one college fell either way on that mark. The last insight from this was this one over on the right, where you can see there was $1.63 across that sample set. That's the per annum cost across the total data set that we saw per student. And I think that's also interesting, just to put in context. We're talking about video streaming resources here, $1.63 per student. Interesting just to kind of know what kind of investment we're putting in here on a per student basis, particularly in light of other consumer platforms like Netflix, $120 a year. The last kind of thing I did here is I actually did a little bit of a correlation analysis. So I said, okay, well, is there any correlation between how much a library is spending under this program versus their CPU? And the answer really is no. In fact, the trend line is exactly flat. So it's not the case. The x-axis is how much they're spending under DDA, and the y-axis is what was their cost per use. And as you can see, it's kind of like a big scatter plot all over the map. So it doesn't really say, it's not as if colleges which are seeing more usage and more spend are seeing a different cost per use than colleges that are spending less use and less spend. My final remarks, I just wanted to kind of say two things. One was, I think cost per use is a really, really, really good discussion to have. And, it's really an honor to be up here, to be able to participate in this discussion, because it's something which we think is really important. And as you can see, we're really investing in the data analytics here, given that we see that as important. But I think that there's two really important things around cost per use. And I know David's been talking about this a lot, which is around the impact as well. And I think when it comes to impact, we have to kind of really look at the impact of use when we're talking about cost per use as well. Because no two films are the same, and no two uses are the same, are they? My first remark is really about that. I mean, for example, millions of YouTube videos of cat memes are watched every day online. And, if we were going to use a CPU analysis, we would think that that was the best thing for our library. But unfortunately, cat memes don't necessarily have the learning outcomes which we're trying to drive for our students. So we have to obviously take into account that, not every use is the same. And another kind of aspect was I was talking to one library as part of this research I was doing here, and one library said that, across different platforms, we see different types of uses. One platform had an average minutes per play of 2 minutes, 2 minutes 40 minutes per play. Another platform had an average of 5 minutes per play, and another platform had 21 minutes per play. And so, again, like when we're talking about use, we assume all use is the same. Not to suggest that any film, short, long is the same, but we just need to obviously be cognizant that different uses might be different impacts. In addition to that, my second remark is really actually about the breadth of use as well. Put it this way. Let's say you're a college and a library, and you had 100 plays which happened last month being October, and you had 100 plays on your campus. Now, my question for you is, would you rather that be one person watching 100 films or 100 people watching one film? Now, I'm going to hazard a guess, and I'm going to suggest that you all landed on the second option there. We would much rather, as a library, be impacting 100 people than be impacting one person to a great degree. And so this is a little bit of analysis which I wanted to introduce to actually guide that discussion, because if we're talking about the value of the resource, well, let's bring into the discussion the value of the volume of people that we're impacting. This is actually the data analytics from one of the colleges up here on the stage, and I'm not going to say which one because I haven't asked them, so I've just done the analysis. But this is actually saying in a given 3-month period, this is August, September and October of 2017, looking at every single one of the users that used their platform during that 3-month period. And this is breaking down just the number of people who watched a film. Okay? So obviously a lot of people come to the platform and they don't watch a film. They come, they browse around, click on 5 films and leave. We're ignoring those users and excluding them from the analysis. This is just a breakdown of people who actually proceed to watch a film. And of those people, 56% watch 1 film in that 3-month period, 19% watch 2 films, 8% watch 3 films, and so on and so forth. And I think that this is really interesting analysis to guide this discussion around value. Cost per use is obviously one really important element, but when we look at that U element, I think what's really important here is to actually think about, is that QU? Is that quality usage? And so I think a really interesting metric that I hope at one point in the future we'll be able to come up with is a CPQU potentially metric, cost per quality usage. And so this is where this is really coming into play, like how quality is the usage which we're driving based on the quality of the content and also the breadth of people that we're impacting. Thank you very much.
Seamless. All right. That worked out. Hello, everyone. My name is Corey Tucker, and I'm the head of continuing resources and collections at the UNLV libraries. And we're going to do a little bit of a shift here and sort of talk about some individual case studies, what different types of libraries are doing with streaming media, and some of the issues and challenges that we have faced as we've built our streaming media collections. At UNLV, we've been quite aggressive with building our streaming media collections. We've incorporated a variety of purchase models to help build that collection due to our budget. So we have perpetually purchased video collections from some vendors. We do have 3 or 4 subscription databases for streaming media. And we also have 2 demand-driven acquisition projects going on, one with Canopy and one with Alexander Street Press. And of course, as they come in, we do title by title selection, where we're used to obviously buy the DVD. Now the preferred format is streaming, and if we can get the streaming rights, we will do that for individual titles that are requested by faculty. We really ramped up our streaming media collecting back in 2015, and I sort of grabbed some expenditure data that covered about 3 years of data. And when we started out in 2015, we spent around $36,000 on subscriptions and DDA purchases or costs. This past year, we were close to $90,000. So we have really increased the amount of money we're spending towards DDA, and Tom and David are back here going, oh yeah. So you're welcome. And so, obviously, the talk here is about the impact or what are you getting for your dollars that you're spending. So we have been assessing all of our resources for several years, and so the data I have, the cost per use here, is for 3 years of data just across a model. So for UNLV, looking at all of our subscriptions for streaming media, our cost is around $3.63 per use. And for DDA, the cost per use is around $2.73. So they're very similar, very close in cost as far as the dollar figures go. And we were very happy with these figures. Are these good numbers? Maybe, maybe not, but that's why we're sort of here for this presentation. It's great to see the figures from Tom and from David, so we can sort of potentially compare ourselves to like or similar institutions and see maybe, we're within a good range and we're getting value for what we're spending. If you look at just pure usage, obviously we've increased the amount of media titles that our patrons have access to, but our usage for our subscription databases have increased 82% over 3 years, and with DDA it's around 252%. So we're getting lots of usage. We've talked about CPU, the cost per use, and the value of that. I also think it's valuable to incorporate some other type of analytics, and Tom sort of hit on a couple of those as far as cost per student and the number of times a film was viewed. And we also want to know more about who is using the streaming media. And many of the vendors are really good about providing reports where you can run them by a subject area or subject collections. You won't see cat memes up here. I'm sure that there are plenty of those watched in our libraries, but looking across our subscription and DDA models, 4 disciplines really jumped to the top: psychology, race studies, sociology, and nursing. So those are the 4 that are the highest pretty much among all of our different various models. Another thing that we did find where we looked at course reserves within the library, we looked at any of like Blackboard or WebCT, if you have those kinds of course web pages, and talking with faculty who have submitted requests for streaming media titles, that at UNLV specifically, most of the streaming media usage is driven by undergraduate classes and are there to support and supplement the curriculum. And another thing we did see through a couple of the administrative modules is that you'll see if you log in that there will have referrer URLs, so where people are accessing that content. And for several of our interfaces or platforms, the web campus, which is our course platforms, it's like 3rd highest or 4th highest among the different interfaces. And just talking a little bit about my experience having dealt with streaming media over the past couple of years, I do recommend using and going into the administrative modules, because I think in the past 3 years I've seen these administrative modules really improve. There are tons and tons of analytics in there where you can grab a variety of data to help assess the value of what you're getting for the streaming media content. When you look at usage data, you also have to be careful. There are counter reports for streaming media. However, not every vendor, as we all know, is counter compliant. And those that are not counter compliant may have different definitions of what a view or a use is. So you have to be really careful comparing across platforms. I talked a little bit about assessment. You want to look at your usage, but you also want to try to get other data that gives you a more clear picture, like who's using it and what are they using it for. With cataloging and discovery, with any streaming media subscription or DDA, you have monthly updates of new MARC records. So you want to make sure that those are scheduled and those are done on a monthly basis, and that the new records that you put in are accessible and discoverable. That's a huge issue. We've had some loads that have come in that were corrupted, and we had to redo them, but we didn't discover it for a couple of weeks. So you always want to test out that access. And then management of streaming collections. One of the things that we have run into, which we have not perfected, there are a couple of things associated with this. One, if you are doing DDA, when you do trigger a title, we use our ERM to put that title as its own record so that we know when the renewal is coming up, where we want to identify, do we want to renew that license or do we want to put it back in the DDA pool? Otherwise, it can be hard to track those renewals. Secondly, with our DDA, we have deposit accounts. And so keeping track of how much is in your deposit account, making sure invoices have cleared those deposit accounts is another challenge from an accounting perspective that we've run into as well. And then also, if you do buy title by title selection, making sure when you do have streaming rights that we put those records in our ERM as well, so that if there are any issues with broadcasting or streaming of that title, we have protection there. So you need to track those licenses and that access. And then finally, we try to do as much marketing and promotion as possible. The vendors have great resources for that. So we do every quarter, every 3 months or every 6 months, try to get out some kind of promotional content for our streaming media since we're investing so much in it. But that's sort of our experience, and if you have questions, we will have time available at the end of the presentation. So Rebecca, please.
How do I get it to come up?
You're good.
Oh, great. Okay. So I'm Rebecca Oling. I'm from Purchase College. And one of the things that I love about coming and presenting at conferences is that as part of an audience member, there's always this feeling that, wow, if I could just aspire to do all the things that I see all of these people doing. And I am here to be your every person, because we have a very different situation at Purchase College. I wear several hats. I am the coordinator of instruction in the library, so I do a lot of instruction. I do reference. I do collection development over a variety of areas. I do assistive technology, and in recent years, I have become the streaming person. So anybody out there like me? A few people. Okay, good. So at Purchase College, we have developed relationships with the vendors over time, and we use Canopy, we use Alexander Street, we use Swank, and we do individual licensing, as Corey was saying that they do at UNLV. We have a much smaller campus. We have 4,500 FTE, and we have to be a little bit scrappier about how we approach this. I don't really have a lot of back-end access to financial information about how money is spent in the library. And so my job and my goal is to make the most of what I have on my platforms and to negotiate the lowest prices I can on individual rights when possible. And I really focus on learning how to use these administrative panels to understand some of the numbers. And I've only had access to that for the last year, so the vendors have been extremely helpful in helping me understand those numbers. I really focus on driving up my value and driving down my cost per use by making sure that we have cross promotion. So when we have titles that I know are going to be triggered, I actually go into the course catalog, I find other courses that might benefit from those titles, and I email faculty members to let them know that, hey, this title is available and you might find it really interesting for the class that you're about to teach or the class that you're about to teach in the summer or next semester. Of course, we also take advantage of hot topics. We do digital displays in our library through our Digital Collection Center. And Recently, we had a hip hop week, and so part of our digital display for hip hop week involves some of our streaming titles. We also focus on campus or local things going on. So if there's something in particular that's happening, we try to go with that. So for example, we had the hip hop week. We also use we have a common campus experience. This year it was I Am Not Your Negro. And so all of our freshmen came in and had to watch that film. But in addition to that, I then take that title and take it to all of the classes that might be interested in it to double up on that so that I can drive down my cost per use. And I really focus also on instructional design. So when I'm talking to faculty members at the very beginning of them conceiving their courses, I try to make sure that they're thinking early on about what content that they might be able to use that we already have access to or that we might be able to get through one of our vendors. I also talk to them about the value of flipping the classroom, that's often, for a lot of the streaming stuff that we have, it's a great idea to assign some of these films, and then they can do a forum discussion or talk about it in face-to-face so that you're using your face-to-face time in classes more wisely. And finally, I really sell a lot of our films to people via disaster planning. So when I'm doing instructional design with people, I talk to them about what's going to happen when the hurricane hits, or your kids get sick, or your car breaks down and you can't get to campus. And so I really encourage all of our faculty members to have some kind of a disaster plan where they have a film or something like that, or a film clip picked out that they can open up in the course management system and already have some kind of forum discussion for students to work on in their absence. So I think that they find that extremely helpful. But I know that you're here to talk about numbers, and in the extent to which I can talk about numbers, I use a lot of the vendor training opportunities and actually use opportunities like this to force myself to learn a little bit more. But I think that there's a lot that we've already talked about how understanding these numbers can illuminate how our collection is used. And it wasn't really a surprise to me that 40% of our DDA money was spent on one publisher last year. The majority of our, and when I say publisher, I mean Criterion Collection for us, we have a film program and a cinema studies program. And so it's no surprise that the majority of our money is spent in that particular area. At the same rate, when we look at numbers on our subscription platforms, we have a theater program. So theater titles had 83% playback, meaning they were really, really delving into that collection and watching that. But also, newsreels were 83%. And even with that, we have a history program. So that, I think our disciplines were very similar to Corey's, except that we don't have a nursing program. We have the cinema and we have the theater. So I think it's interesting when you're thinking about how can I shape my collection, what changes can I make to tamp down use in areas where I'm not getting the good cost per use. And sometimes you have to make those decisions. It's good to look at being able to identify places where you can defend your usage as well, so that you can take that information to your administration and say, listen, there's nothing I can do about this number. That's a good number for us. We want to be spending that money there because it's an important place for us. And I often talk with people about expanding your stream, and that's something that I really started this year, which is we have 5,000 DVDs in our collection. What in there already has streaming rights that we don't know about? And we don't have a good way of figuring that out. So I started just a little tiny study this summer where I contacted all of the publishers that had the word foundation in their name. And I asked them, are streaming rights included at all in the titles that we have from you? And surprisingly, about half of them did. So that expanded my stream a little bit, and I'm now able to advertise. I do it with a live guide, for lack of a better way. I list those on my live guide. I don't have them currently streaming now, but if somebody asks me for them, I have them available, and I know that they have streaming rights. And I'm sure that there are many other things in our collection that have streaming rights that I don't know about yet. And the various vendors also have a lot of hosting opportunities, so we usually we'll take those streaming rights and we'll mount them through the hosting opportunities. And I think another thing that we have to think about is when to kind of pass the buck. We've talked about what the low, medium, and high cost per use are in the data set that David was looking at and in what Tom was looking at. And I think that there are times when we have to pass on costs to students. We don't like to do that, but if we're going to be in that position, if we're going to do that, I think we need to do it responsibly, and we need to do it at a level that they're not paying a whole lot more than we would pay for them. And sometimes we have to do it because certain vendors can't get other rights. So sometimes we're forced to go outside of the vendors that we know and trust and talk to on the phone. And sometimes we have to go to an Amazon or suggest that a professor send students to Netflix and sign up for that. But how are we going to do that responsibly? And we also have to be very careful of that. We have a lot of online courses at the college that are growing, and we have to be very careful about when we do that to make sure that the professors are actively engaging with their students on who they are and where they're taking the classes. Because you could have an online class and have a student in China who can now not access the information, and that's not fair. So we have to be very careful about that. And if we're not positive that we're going to have an all US audience for the online course, we need to caution the professor to find a plan B for that. And negotiating. David talked about a world in which we might get to a place where we can negotiate a little bit more as institutions, and I would just encourage you to try it. It's not pleasant, we don't like to do it, but the truth is, a lot of vendors and distributors, especially independent ones, will listen to you, and they will hear what your needs are and what your use streams are for their film. And oftentimes they want to be a part of that, and we should let them be a part of that discussion and engage them with that, and you'll find some success there as well. That's it. Ooh, that was harsh.
So that leaves about 6 or 7 minutes for any questions.
No questions?
You might want to go to that microphone. It's like,
A question about throttling in PDA. So you've got a deposit account, you're burning through it like crazy. How do you decide who and what gets cut off?
sounds like a question for
Do
you
you,
two.
you want to take that? I mean, I spoke to that a
Yeah.
little bit. Are we on? Here, why don't you take this?
So, that's a very good question. Luckily, we haven't faced that, but if you do, we when we look at our DDA program, one of the things that could potentially be done, if you're running out of money and you want to throttle it, you can always look and see. I think potentially negotiating with the vendor to see if you can get certain films, like maybe in a more flexible model subscription, potentially of your high use film. So you could go to the vendor administrative module and run a list of the titles that have been used the most, and maybe get pricing for those. And then, the issue is you're going to have to do a lot of dirty work on the back end as far as scraping out those MARC records and things of that nature. And I think another possibility would be if you do know specific faculty who are quite fond of the streaming media, maybe working with them on selecting some titles and doing it that way. But that is the chance you take with DDA. We do it with ebooks as well, and with the streaming media is you have to forecast, and as it's potentially being eaten up, we have looked to use endowment money to help supplement that because we have that flexibility. But you would have to, I think, really grab your usage statistics and your title and subject data and see which are the highest used ones, and maybe then go to the vendor and really start talking about what options you have. But you do run, DDA can be feast or famine, and we luckily have not run into it where we're running out of money so far. But it could happen.
I can just speak quickly to our scenario, and in our scenario, we did run into that issue. We were 100% over in one of our DDA plans, and the problem was not the usage, the problem was the budget. And I needed to make that case that, it was 45% of our money because it's a huge major for us and we need to have those films available, So no apologies on that one.
Well, and one other thing that I will talk about too is at UNLV we have a collections committee that really helps drive any purchasing or say cancellation decisions, and we have assessment data, like I said, for 20 some odd years of all of our books and electronic resources, everything. And so if we were to run into a scenario where, like Rebecca said, if the problem is that the usage at your budget, you should putting more in there, we would start looking for other resources to potentially cancel, I think, on a one-by-one basis. Because if you look at your data year by year, there are resources that are really not providing a lot of value, and there could be overlap or duplication among aggregators potentially that you could do to find and identify ones to cancel.
This is just a kind of an unrelated question, but maybe more related to streaming video and the future of it. But we get more and more requests for content specific to Amazon and Hulu that's only available streaming. Have you come across that, and how do you deal with it with your faculty?
Have you come across that?
I honestly haven't come across that to be. I can't think of anything, but it has been on our radar a little bit with. Like Amazon or Hulu, and also, we are starting to become more of an Apple campus, and also we started looking at providing ways for students to get certain apps as well, but we are just investigating it. So we haven't run into that, but it is on our radar. So I'm sorry I can't provide more information, but that is on our watch list, I think.
Well, I would just go back to that's what I was speaking about when sometimes you have to go to Amazon or Netflix or one of those other vendors. It's not something that we choose to do. We would much rather work with our established jobbers, if you would. But sometimes you have to. And I could see this happening probably in gender studies or political science with regard to a title like Handmaid's Tale. Right. So, I am anticipating that kind of thing happening. But I think that there are times when you have to do that. The caution for that is, where are the students taking the class from? If it's an online class, you have to be really careful about making sure you're not requiring students to to get information in a place where they can't access it. And that's been a little bit of a challenge. We've had a couple of instances of that in our online classes.
I thought I'd jump in and just provide a little bit of an answer to the first question as well, which I just thought might be helpful. So I think the question which you had was with DDA, growth, how do you kind of, manage budgets? And I think, there's a couple of really interesting points around that, because I think the first thing to say is that, the growth in demand is certainly there, right? We're seeing growth in demand for video streaming on campuses, and that's driven by a variety of factors. But I think take a step back and recognize that streaming didn't even exist as of 13 years ago. Mm-hmm. YouTube came out in 2004, Netflix came out in 2007, and here we are in 2017. And here we are as a library, we're dealing with books which we've had since the 14th century, and now we've got another medium which we're trying to grapple our heads around, which has been around for 10 years. So it's really hard to kind of, we've been dealing with something for a very long period of time, and it's been really, really hard to kind of grapple our head around exactly where's this going, and how do we kind of deal with this new resource. The other kind of really big thing which has been happening is the growth has just been phenomenal. You walk off campus, your average American is spending 60% of time on all media is spent on video. That includes TV and digital video. That's 17 times the amount of time they're spending on books. So your average human being is spending 17 times the volume amount of time with film than they are with books, and yet we walk on campus and that kind of really flips around. And I think that dichotomy is kind of starting to affect campus, right? Because there's a lot of reasons why campuses are shifting, to film. Like we got younger faculty coming in, we have, visual literacy is a really big thing. 65% of people are visually literate. Even to and this is probably a sad analogy, but there's a time efficiency factor. If you're trying to teach a kid Pride and Prejudice, they can watch the 1 hour, 50-minute film, or they could go and sit there and read the book for 35 hours. But that's a really bad, I know I've got librarians in the room, and that's probably the worst thing I could say, but, but that's, there is efficiency. So, we are dealing with a medium that, there is some efficiency to it. There's a lot of reasons, online learning, et cetera, which is causing that growth which we're seeing. And it is a medium which off campus is, obviously a preferential demand. So that's kind of flowing onto campus. So that's the growth. I'd say just to answer the second part of your question, which is how do you throttle that? Well, you can control the content, you can remove content, you can control the periods of time when you open up access to content. So for example, you can turn off access during the holiday periods. In general, 90% of usage is within 6 months, which is the semester periods anyway. So it's obviously very course aligned and faculty semester aligned, but you do have a lot of options there for managing your program.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Tom, that you can always profile down to your top disciplines. That's another solution. I just want to say thank you everybody for coming. It's been great seeing you all. I started the first half of my career in the textbook publishing world, right? And I have watched this evolution that Tom referred to, particularly in the way courses are created. And the growth of video is really inevitable. So grapple with this presentation, grapple with how you adjust your budgets, and keep coming back and giving us more information. Thank you.